Book nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns tells one of the most important but too often underappreciated stories in American history. The decades-long migration of Black Americans from the South to the North and West, a movement that reshaped the nation socially, politically, and culturally. Between 1915 and 1970, nearly 6 million Black men and women made the decision to leave behind the world they knew, fields, small towns, segregated cities, family homes, and take a leap of faith into new, uncharted territory. It was not a single, organized migration, but a quiet, continuous stream of people who individually made decisions that collectively added up to one of the largest internal movements of people in the modern era. Wilkerson, with the precision of a historian and the empathy of a storyteller, reconstructs this journey by weaving together historical data, sociological insights, and most powerfully, the personal stories of three migrants whose lives she follows from the roots of their decisions to the end of their journeys. The book grounds itself in the reality of the Jim Crow South, where Black Americans were held in a caste system that denied them basic dignity and opportunities. They were bound to labor that barely sustained them, often working as sharecroppers on land they did not own, perpetually indebted to white landlords who manipulated the books to keep them trapped. More than that, the legal and social systems of the South reinforced submission. Laws dictated where they could sit, which doors they could enter, which schools their children could attend, which restrooms they could use, even how they should behave in the presence of white people. A small infraction could mean humiliation, violence, or death. The promise of freedom after slavery had turned into a tightly managed system of control, one enforced not just by statute, but by the ever-present threat of lynching, beatings, and exclusion from justice. It was, as Wilkerson describes, a system of American apartheid. For many Black Southerners, migration was not simply a matter of seeking opportunity. It was survival, an act of resistance against a suffocating system. Wilkerson chooses to tell the grand story through the intimate lives of three people: Ida Mae Gladney, George Starling, and Robert Foster. Each represents a different geography, time period, and set of circumstances, but together their lives illuminate the universal push and pull that shaped the Great Migration. Ida Mae, born into the rural South of Mississippi, lived the kind of life that had been typical for generations of Black families. She picked cotton alongside her husband, endured the indignities of Jim Crow, and knew the limits imposed upon her by both law and custom. Yet despite her hardships, she had an inner resilience and quiet determination. She and her husband made the decision to leave for Chicago in the 1930s. Their departure was not dramatic in the sense of speeches or declarations. It was more the quiet act of getting on a train and stepping into the unknown. Once in Chicago, Ida Mae faced the challenges of adjusting to a big city, learning its rhythms, and finding work. But she also found a new sense of freedom. While racism existed in the North, it did not have the same legally codified grip as in Mississippi. In Chicago, she could vote, send her children to better schools, and begin building a life that was not as tightly controlled by white overseers. Her journey illustrates the earliest waves of the migration, when families sought to carve out modest but meaningful lives in industrial cities of the North. George Starling's story takes us into the mid-century phase of migration. A bright young man from Florida, George had hoped for a better life but found himself working in the citrus groves, subject to the exploitation and harshness of that world. He became aware of labor organizing and tried to fight for fair treatment, but this quickly put him in danger. The white grove owners did not tolerate dissent, and George soon realized that his efforts to stand up for workers could cost him his life. For him, migration became a matter of urgency. If he stayed, he would be crushed. He fled to New York City, where he found work as a porter on the railroads. His life there exposed him to a new kind of existence. He was constantly in motion, traveling up and down the eastern seaboard, seeing a different world, encountering new ideas. Yet he also saw the cost of migration, broken ties to the South, the struggles of families caught between two worlds, and the enduring challenges of racism, even in the supposedly freer North. George's journey reflects both the bravery and the sacrifices required in leaving, as well as the reality that the North was not a perfect promised land, but simply a different terrain in the same long struggle. Robert Foster's story highlights the migration's later wave and its impact on professional ambition. Born in Louisiana, Robert was intelligent, driven, and determined to become a doctor. Yet in the South, the ceiling for Black professionals was low. No matter how skilled, Black doctors were denied privileges in white hospitals, restricted to serving Black patients in segregated facilities, and denied the resources to expand their practices. Robert dreamed of more. He wanted recognition, opportunity, and the chance to practice medicine at the highest level. So he made the bold decision to leave and set his sights on California. His road trip west was itself filled with the obstacles of Jim Crow. He had to carefully plan where he could stop, which hotels would accept him, which restaurants would serve him, and often he had to sleep in his car rather than risk humiliation or danger. When he finally established himself in California, Robert built a successful practice and even became the personal physician to Ray Charles. His story captures the ambition of later migrants who sought not only freedom from oppression, but also the chance to rise into professional and cultural prominence. By following these three lives, Wilkerson demonstrates that the Great Migration was not a monolith. It spanned decades, touched every corner of the country, and unfolded differently for each family. Some moved northward to Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, or New York. Others went westward to Los Angeles, Oakland, or Seattle. Wherever they landed, they carried with them the traditions, food, music, and resilience of the South, blending them with their new surroundings and transforming American culture. Jazz, blues, gospel, and later soul and hip-hop all bore the imprint of the South, but thrived in the urban spaces of the North and West. Writers of the Harlem Renaissance, artists, intellectuals, and leaders all drew from the migration. In this sense, the Great Migration was not just about people moving, it was about the reshaping of American identity. Wilkerson does not shy away from the hardships migrants faced once they arrived. Housing discrimination, redlining, job discrimination, and northern forms of racism awaited many who thought they were escaping only to discover new barriers. Neighborhoods became overcrowded because Black families were restricted in where they could live, and city governments often neglected services in those areas. White flight and resentment sometimes greeted the newcomers, leading to tension and riots. Yet, despite these obstacles, the migrants often persevered, driven by a determination that life in the North or West, even with its challenges, offered more dignity and opportunity than the South. They voted in higher numbers, built institutions, sent their children to universities, and slowly changed the social and political landscape of America. The book is rich with historical detail that situates these personal stories in a broader context. Wilkerson shows how the migration paralleled other global movements, such as the displacement of people in war or the seeking of opportunity across continents. She also highlights the psychological dimensions of migration, the fear of the unknown, the grief of leaving loved ones, the anxiety of finding one's place in a new land, but also the exhilaration of possibility. For many, it was like shedding an old skin and daring to imagine a new life. One of the most poignant themes Wilkerson draws out is that migration was an assertion of agency. For centuries, African Americans had been forced to move against their will, first through slavery, then through the sharecropping system that tied them to the land. The Great Migration was the first time that millions of Black Americans made a collective, voluntary decision to move for their own futures. This act of self-determination was radical in its quietness. No protest signs, no marches, just millions of people boarding trains, driving cars, and buying bus tickets, heading toward a dream that was often uncertain, but their own to pursue. Wilkerson's storytelling reminds the reader of the courage it took. Migrants risked everything. They left behind family, familiar landscapes, churches, and communities. They ventured into cities where they were outsiders, often looked down upon by both whites and the black communities that had arrived earlier. They had to learn new skills, adjust to new climates, and withstand loneliness. Yet, through it all, many built lives that transformed the trajectories of their descendants. Children of migrants became teachers, doctors, artists, athletes, leaders. The ripple effects of their journeys reached into every corner of American society. The title of the book itself, The Warmth of Other Suns, comes from a line by Richard Wright, himself a migrant, who described leaving the South to seek the warmth of other suns. It captures both the hope and the melancholy of the migration, the longing for something better, the ache of leaving home, and the enduring faith that a new sun could shine on one's life. Wilkerson's work is not just history. It is a meditation on human resilience, the pursuit of freedom, and the cost of both staying and leaving. The Great Migration also shifted political power in America. As Black populations grew in northern cities, their votes began to matter in elections, changing the political landscape and laying the groundwork for the civil rights movement. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and countless others were shaped by the migration directly or indirectly. The new urban Black populations became a force that could not be ignored, demanding justice and pushing America to confront its racial contradictions. Without the migration, the civil rights victories of the mid-20th century would likely not have been possible. By the end of The Warmth of Other Suns, the reader comes to see the migration as a profound turning point in American history, equal in magnitude to the waves of European immigration or the westward expansion. Yet, unlike those stories, it is too often overlooked in history books. Wilkerson restores its rightful place in the national narrative, giving voice to the millions who risked everything for a chance at dignity and opportunity. Her combination of intimate storytelling and sweeping historical analysis creates a portrait that is both deeply personal and universally resonant. Ultimately, the book leaves us with the understanding that the Great Migration was not just about geography. It was about the human spirit's refusal to be confined. It was about people choosing hope over despair, freedom over subjugation, and possibility over certainty. It is a story that continues to echo today, reminding us of the power of movement, the courage of individuals, and the way ordinary decisions can reshape nations. And that's it. The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, the epic story of America's Great Migration. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.